for today's conversation, I wanted to take a look at a couple of documents that you've pointed out in your work that I think are worth talking about. One of them is Reset the Table, Meeting the Moment to Transform the U.S. Food System by our pals at the Rockefeller Foundation, and The Man Behind the Curtain, the Gates Foundation's influence on the UN Food Systems Summit. These are two documents that I've discovered through your work that I think quite obviously lay out part of what this agenda is about, but perhaps you can put it on the table for us. What are these documents? What do they point out to us about where this agenda is heading?
Sure. So the Rockefellers Reset the Table, which continues to say how to meet the moment to fundamentally transform the U.S. food system, is one of these set of documents. There's one sort of takes different forms around the world. There's one in the EU that's called Farm to Fork, how we're going to create a sustainable, equitable situation. China's got a version called Clean Your Plate. And they sort of codify in their own local ways the words and the ideas we've seen flowing down from the UN, and again, indeed, from the Club of Rome before them, that we need to be eating bugs in order to save the planet and these sorts of things. It's sort of written in the kind of globalist gobbledygook language that talks about stakeholders and we're going to create this equitable, sustainable future. When you dig into it, though, it is talking about we're going to shut down traditional farming and ranching. We're going to make the case that it's dirty and antiquated and it's a barbarous relic like gold. And we simply, James, we can't afford to take the risk of continuing to do things the way we have been since the dawn of time. And that means we're going to take away your ability to raise your own food and your ability to raise animals and dictate, just as we now are, what goes in your body through vaccines. Because of this public health crisis globally, global problems require global solutions. And since diet is part of the health situation here, we're going to marry these two things, and we're also going to take total control of what you eat. And so that's sort of what the document it sets out to do and starts chipping away at doing.
It is interesting. It's not the part that I consciously dwell on, but of course it has been an important part of that Malthusian formulation since the time of Malthus that, the population is increasing exponentially, but food supply is increasing arithmetically. Therefore, and it's always been that food supply insecurity has been the reason that has always been shoved in our face for these momentous transformations of human society. And here we are yet again. So back 50 years ago, we had the Green Revolution. Hey, everybody, just take all these modern farming implements and all these modern farming methods that, by the way, run on, Rockefeller oil, and use that, and that will transform the food supply. And then it became the Gene Revolution. Well, we'll just genetically modify all these organisms to yield so much greater yields. And they still, in their documents, point to the flavor saver tomato. Well, actually, it didn't really work and no one bought it and it's not sold anymore. But it was a great step forward for solving food supply issues somehow. Golden rice and all these other things that they've continued to promote. But as much as I know about that part of the agenda, it gets even creepier and crazier the way they are literally trying to limit our ability to do what humans have done throughout all of recorded history and into prehistory, which is farm and or raise livestock in order to feed ourselves. They are trying to eliminate our ability to do that. Perhaps you can outline some of the attack points that they are using and the ways they are trying to limit our ability to make our own way in life.
Yeah, you're dead on. This is not just something they're doing. It's food 2.0, but we can just open market. We can keep doing things the old way. No, they have to eliminate food 1.0 and force us on food 2.0. They must kill off humanity 1.0 to become humanity 2.0. We see animal welfare and animal rights being used as another one of these wedges where bills like IP13 in Oregon are saying we have to shut down ranching. You can keep animals, and you can only eat them if they die of natural causes. Well, that means you can't raise animals for meat anymore. And so different areas are taking different sort of attacks, like the animal welfare versus the zoonotic risk. And then water is the big one right now. You're seeing this is really breaking through the headlines in this past week, this massive mega drought across the West, as the New York Times is out there ringing that bell. And they are actively shutting down the irrigation, both to farming and ranching, which means you've got farmers who are having to truck in water just to keep their animals fed. So they will use any number of policy interventions and hard interventions, like things that geoengineering, where it's hard to point the finger at them, but you're very aware that something is going on, and particularly in light of the fact that this is their stated goal, you can see all of these things coming together. So they have a number of weapons in their arsenal, but they're all being implemented right now.
Right, and this is getting pretty dark for a Solutions Watch episode, but it is important to understand this because, as you say, if it was only about them trying to sell us us this GM crap and we could say no and just grow our own food, that's one thing. But if they're actively trying to stop our ability to actually grow food ourselves, then that's a very different problem that will require different solutions. So let's reorient this conversation towards that solutions focus. What can we begin to do to actually put a dent in this agenda, derail it, or create our own food supply systems? What is it that we should be actively engaged in?
So that is the question. It's a big question. And I think before even starting to try and answer, it's healthy to step back and acknowledge that this is it's a non-trivial problem we're facing right now. And part of what makes it hard is that the current system is being demolished, right? They've already destroyed the old normal. They've got the supply chains in chaos, and they're continuing to attack that. They've got these vaccines going out. It's pretty ridiculous what we're going through right now. We have to accept, though, that old normal is already gone. And right now, unfortunately, the only solution that is really out there is the World Economic Forum solution, this fail forwards further into no farming and ranching and biotech, nanotech foods, to blockchain and AI and the cybernetic Internet of Bodies, all of the future that they've described that as people are learning about it, nobody really wants. And that's kind of the good news here. Nobody wants this World Economic Forum solution. But because there's no alternative, that's sort of just the default way that we're failing forward. So we need that alternative. And there are some good dialogues out there. The Greater Reset, Michael Tellender's Ubuntu, Rainer Fulmick is having some good discussions. But a lot of these are centered around how do we push back on the World Economic Forum. And so there's still, like I said, when you reach for what's the alternative here, it still feels like we have what John Rappaport would say is a failure of imagination. We're coming up blank. I'm not sure how we solve that big problem, because the nature of this problem is the centralization. That's the real root of this problem. And so the nature of our solution is a decentralized system. And that means that it necessarily has many forms. So I can't give you the solution. We can just talk about the idea that it involves massively decentralizing. And then we can sort of speak to some properties that any number of these pieces of the solution probably have. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that that's obviously that resonates with the message that I'm constantly putting out. Decentralization, disintermediation of the system that has been so carefully centralized to the point where the idea of cutting us off from our own ability to grow food is even possible or imaginable. That has never been even thinkable in human history up until this point, where now we are generally trained to be on the factory farming to supermarket supply line, where we're just going to the supermarket and there's this prepackaged meal and now it's synthetic lab meat. Okay, whatever. That wouldn't have been possible in any previous era of human history. The problem, the real root of the problem, is that we have so thoroughly forsaken the alternative infrastructure for a decentralized distribution of food supply that most people are probably unaware of the options that are even around them about being able to buy directly from ranchers or farmers in their own area, because that infrastructure has been so dilapidated. I guess my thoughts are along the lines of we have to build up that infrastructure now. We should have been doing it 10 years ago, but hey, how about now? What do you think about that?
Absolutely. Yeah, it was death by a thousand cuts in the name of convenience that got us here. And so, yes, recognizing that the only way that they actually have power is by virtue of us depending on them. And so that speaks to the obvious first part of this property of what these distributed solutions look like, which is self-sufficiency. As we get off of these systems that they're destroying. So we start growing food. We start producing our own goods. There's really a shift from consumption to production. And that's where I think at all levels, starting with our own and then moving out to your local economy and then growing out from there, the shift has to happen. So growing food is a huge part of that. I talk about that a lot. I always want to name the 5 principles of good soil husbandry, because that's just the most basic and effective way of growing really good, nutritious food. And it also works at any level, like your kitchen shelf all the way up to your whole regenerative farm operation. So I know we're short on time, so I'll just say check out those 5 soil principles. Maybe we'll come back at the end if we have time. Saving seeds is another big part of that. Seeds are amazing because they learn. They learn about the environment you're growing them in, and so if you have to order them online and you get them that way, that's fine. It's even better if you can get them from your neighbors or someone in your local area, and there's plenty of ways to do that, from seed libraries, seed exchanges, local county extensions of your state ag university will often be able to give you seeds for free. And if you can start with those seeds that are closer to home for you, they're going to do better. Otherwise, it's fine. You just take those seeds from the internet and give them a season, and they'll start acclimating. They'll figure out your growing season is shorter, or there's less water, or the shade in the afternoon. Whatever the specific story is that goes along with those is great. And then, from then on, you have abundant seeds to share with your neighbors along with that story. Oh, they really preferred the afternoon shade for whatever reason. But just really realizing that there's magic, there's life in these seeds, and that they learn, and you start to see that they are a form of wealth. This is why they used to be part of, someone's getting married and you hand them the family seeds and pass those down. Keeping animals is a huge part of this too. You see, we can learn a lot by looking at their vectors of attack, and one of their primary ones is ending animal agriculture and taking away our animals. And that's because, in fact, one of those 5 principles of soil health is integrating animals into that loop of nutrients and energies across your homestead. You need that manure. You need them to digest the grazing stuff that really isn't good for us anyway, and turn that into usable energy on your homestead. So keeping animals, keeping seeds, practicing good soil husbandry, this is all part of how we start to move the needle in terms of our homestead being self-sufficient.
Well, yeah, let's not leave people hanging on that. Let's take the time to walk through those 5 principles of good soil husbandry.
Perfect. So number 1 is it's all 5 of them are about cultivating a rich, resilient microbiome in your soil. Because when you've got this hardy, resilient ecology going on in your soil, they almost can't help but produce tons of vegetation for you, which feeds you. So you got to feed them and you got to protect them. And all of that is encoded in these 5 principles, which are, number 1, minimize disturbance to the soil. So if you have to till it once to get the whole thing started, I understand. But after that, this really does speak to no-till, not going in there with any implement and breaking up the network of mycelial fungus that's passing around nutrients to the plants and just disturbing this life. If we're going to spend our time cultivating it, we want to protect it. So we're going to keep it, minimize disturbance. We're going to keep it covered at all times. Gabe Brown calls this armor for your soil. So it's just, whether it's a mulch or something to keep the heat of the sun and the wind from spraying all your soil around, just keep it protected. And then beyond just keeping it covered, there's also the idea of keeping a living root in the soil at all times. This is why cover crops are really important, even in the off season, is that a plant is really the device by which the energy of the sun is captured and then fed out into the soil in the form of sugars and these exudates, these rich solutions that the plants actually push out through their roots into the soil. And then the web of life in the soil, all those mycorrhizal fungi and all these things, move the nutrients around to wherever it needs to be, including to other plants in your garden. So this is you're building a highway system for energies and nutrients within your soil. It's really incredible. 4 is maximizing biodiversity, which just means monocropping is the opposite of monocropping, right? Just one kind of plant spread over everywhere. It's going to open you up to all kinds of disease. It's a very weak way. It's just a bad way of doing business. And it's unnatural also is sort of a good clue. So you want to maximize biodiversity, plant lots of different things. If you look at a lot of systems, it talks about companion planting, which just says, hey, tomato and calendula do really well together, where this plant eats the pests that typically affect this one. So not only can we encourage better production, but they can protect each other. And it's just teamwork, right? Teaming up your plants together, maximizing biodiversity. And then again, like I said before, that 5th one, but a big one, an important one, integrating animals into your homestead. So keeping the nutrients and getting that manure production it's just magical. I've got some rabbits, and by far the most explosive growth anywhere on my homestead. And usually, sometimes even by accident. It's not where I planned to have stuff grow, but it's because the rabbits were there for a time, and now it's just exploding with verdant life. And so, yeah, integrating animals is a huge thing.
Obviously, such an important part of of this. Even, I mean, of course, once you get into it and you're doing it, and knowing about these principles and how to apply them is important, and then learning about your local terrain and the local factors, etc. But even just the experience of growing something is something that so many of us have been denatured from in the urban environments that we live in, that we forget the fundamental abundance of the earth. And that these natural systems are developed so that they do work with each other, and these things work in concert to produce life that we then benefit from. The wealth of that abundance is itself, it is a miraculous thing that we have become so denatured from that we don't even connect to it. We don't even see it on a daily basis. So I think just connecting with the soil at all is, I think, important for rooting us in this, which speaks